Welcome back to my review of A Conscious Universe by Armando Calvo. We're getting close. Oh yeah, we're getting real close to the end. This is the penultimate installment. That means the one before the last one. And it's about Chapter 6, Greatest Man in History. And there's a little picture of the man there. Happy little man right there. Since we can't possibly guess what this is going to be about, let's find out together.
One of the most, if not the most, influential and credible man to ever walk this earth, Jesus Christ.
I'm waiting for that sentence to continue, but I guess it won't. He goes on for a while about how the claims about Jesus are verifiable and, quote, could not have been made up or emulated, and then gives an example.
Jesus spoke prophecy, and while we yet to see them all fulfilled, every prophecy that was spoken was accurately accomplished in the order by which it was prophesied.
And to back this up, he gives us Matthew 24, verses 4 through 12, which include a few supposed prophecies, which are meant as a reply to Jesus' disciples' questions about what will be signs of the end times and of Jesus' return. The first is that others will also say they're Christ, or in other words, the Jewish Messiah, which is a convenient attempt to preemptively discredit any future contestants to that title. The second prophecy is that there will be wars or rumors of wars, which is about as obvious as an observation can get, given that it describes pretty much every period of known history. I'll make that same prophecy right now, and I have no concerns about being proven wrong. I feel confident saying that wars will happen. But even if, by some incredible twist of fate, no wars break out for the next century or millennium, it doesn't matter. There's no end to the prediction. There's no best by date. If it doesn't happen by any given date, just wait longer. And that's part of why these prophecies are so uncompelling. There's no specificity to them. They apply to a huge number of events over an unlimited period of time. And this prophecy is especially convenient given that Jesus ends it with, all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So that is, if a war happens, or a rumor of a war happens, don't expect the end times. This is a sign of the end times, but the end times aren't going to happen now, though. Okay, then what's the point? Why even mention it? It's not even a prophecy anymore. It's just saying there's going to be wars in general, and it means nothing. What would be the third prophecy is that nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, but roughly speaking, that's just a repetition of the wars one, so the third, fourth, and fifth prophecies actually are that there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes, which, again, yeah, no kidding. Who could ever have predicted that? You might have noticed, by the way, that there have been many famines, pestilences, and earthquakes, even at the same time as there were wars. In fact, oftentimes tied to the wars, like especially the famines, even the pestilences. And in none of those cases did the end times happen. In fact, you'll see once we go through the full list, and once you see Armando's interpretations of these prophecies, that even if you take all of these prophecies into account, there are ways they can be interpreted that would make them apply to many periods in history. But those weren't the end times. But if you see it now it's going to be the end times. It's all very convenient for the fear-mongering, but not compelling in any way to anyone who hasn't already bought in. In fact, it's kind of anti-compelling. It kind of makes the whole thing look like a gigantic clown show. So the sixth prophecy is that the disciples, in the translation Armando happened to choose this particular time, which is the King James, although it's slightly different, but I'm pretty sure that's just his usual copy errors. Yeah, the disciples will be delivered up to be afflicted, and then killed. Now, the information supporting the claims Christians make about the fates of the apostles is not nearly so clear-cut as apologists want to make it out to be, and the claims about the fates of the apostles are not nearly as clear-cut as apologists would like people to believe. But it wouldn't be unreasonable for Jesus to think his followers would be persecuted at the very least, given that at this point he expected to be crucified soon after. That's often how these kind of things go. It doesn't always just stop with one guy. But in any case, it's not relevant because these are supposed to be signs of the end times, and whatever happened to the apostles happened a couple thousand years ago, so obviously it's not a sign of the end times. The seventh prophecy is that the apostles will be hated of all nations, which never really seemed to happen. Like, certainly towards the start, Rome had its problems with Christians for a little while, until its leaders completely turned over and sided with them entirely. But most non-Roman nations for the first several centuries would hardly have even been aware of Jesus, if at all, let alone had any reason to hate his disciples. Christianity's entire origin is a very Roman phenomenon. And as for today, if these are meant to be the end times, if that's why we're talking about these prophecies, saying that the apostles, or Christians generally, are hated of all nations is patently absurd. The 8th prophecy is that people will be offended and betray and hate one another. What else is new? The 9th one is that false prophets will appear, as usual. Read Deuteronomy 13, or 18, or Jeremiah 23, or 1 Kings 22, or Jeremiah 14, or 5, or Ezekiel 22, or 13. This concept isn't exactly original to Jesus. Jesus even points this out in Luke 6, verse 26. "Woe to you, when everyone speaks well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets." Yeah, that thing that happened a bunch, expect more. In all likelihood, there were false prophets wandering around in Jesus' time, even if we exclude Jesus as one of them. The 10th prophecy is that there will be iniquity, as usual, and the 11th is that the love of many shall wax cold, as usual. So yeah, most of these prophecies are incredibly obvious statements about incredibly common occurrences. One of them is a simple inference based on the political climate at the time. At least one of them simply did not come true, while another one, it's easily argued, at least did not come fully true. And that's it. That's what we're supposed to be impressed by. I don't understand why I would be impressed by this. But nevertheless, El Mondo's impressed.
If we investigate these prophetic words from Jesus thoroughly, we can conclude that all of these things have been descriptively accurate.
And then he proceeds to address them one by one to show how each one is accurate. The first one, about false messiahs, he supports by saying that Jesus has been, quote, mocked and portrayed by many men, which he backs up with a brief description of some random Russian guy who claimed to be Jesus. It's basically the wording off of Wikipedia. I found it on Wikipedia just by searching on Google for part of the text. It's been changed a little bit, but in no way that would pass a plagiarism check. But I guess at least to some extent he tries to use his own words, and I suppose it's worth encouraging that kind of improvement, even if it's an extremely long way from perfect. The modernity of this example shows that he is in fact talking about signs of the end times in the current day. But the page that he took this from, the list of people claimed to be Jesus, has examples going back to the 17th century. And again, that's the problem with using any prediction of this very, very general type to try to establish that any particular time is uniquely qualified to be regarded as the end times. For some reason, despite the fact that he's providing this particular example as evidence that many people have impersonated Christ, he only provides this one example, despite having taken it from a page that's chock full of examples he could have used. You would think if the assertion that you're trying to support is that there's many of some type of thing, you would provide at least several examples of that type of thing. But nope. Next, he tries to support prophecies 2 through 5, wars, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes.
Before any of these things came to pass, Jesus had known what was to come before it came,
he says, and then lists off a bunch of modern examples that, of course, Jesus in no way whatsoever mentioned. The world wars, the Ukraine war, Ebola, COVID, HIV, monkeypox, along with hurricanes, tornadoes, and earthquakes, only the last of which Jesus mentioned.
We cannot make these things up. How did Jesus know these things before they happened?
He didn't. Did you not read the passage? He said wars, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes just in general happen sometimes, which of course he would know because they happened sometimes back then. He never said when they would happen, or what they would be called, or what they would be like. He didn't even say where they would happen. According to your quote, he just said incredibly vaguely that they'll happen in diverse places. Why are you pretending like this constitutes some specific prediction of World War II and HIV? Do you expect people to not notice that you're just flat out lying about what the passage says? Probably. That's kind of your MO through this whole fucking book. Next, he covers the prophecies about the apostles being afflicted and hated of all nations, and of people getting offended and betraying and hating one another. And his evidence for these prophecies coming true is that Christians are persecuted, killed, hated, beaten, judged, falsely accused, which does not seem to address the specific claims about the apostles at all. But if we take those claims as some clumsy attempt by Jesus at a general statement about all Christians instead, his prophecy turns into just an obvious statement about general religious conflict, which would be an especially obvious observation to make given the awareness of his coming crucifixion. Almondo's assertions about Christian persecution correctly describe the state of things in some times, in some places, but it fails to support the much broader claim that Christians will be hated of all nations, which seems just outright false. And finally, he tackles the prophecies of false prophets and iniquity and, chilled love. He doesn't try to provide examples of false prophets, and instead he takes this as some kind of a metaphor for divisive leaders. Ones who make laws, so I would assume politicians, which, given the context that this is in the Bible, it's pretty clear that that's not what's meant by false prophets. As for iniquity, he provides a list of the usual social complaints Christians have. I'll just put it up on the screen for reference. He intends for these examples to show how incredibly accurate these prophecies of Jesus were to the current day, but in fact, what they show is how deeply flawed these prophecies are, as prophecies, because they're far too general to be meaningful, which is why they can be used to say Jesus knew about the Ukraine war, or COVID-19, or abortion, as easily as any other war, or any other disease, or any other Christian bugbear in history, or in the future. How can something be considered a clear sign of the end times when it's a sign of all times? He goes on to talk about the prophecies from 2 Timothy 3 verses 1 through 5, which, because he can't help but repeat himself about this and many other things in this book, I've already covered as much as I need to in part 3, which is the video about chapters 9 and 10. So this time I'll skip it. Almondo rambles for a page or so about how Jesus is really great and stuff, and he makes people's lives better, and you can't explain that, and you know the drill. This is basically off-the-shelf stuff, and it's not an argument, it's just a little generic sermon plopped here in the middle of the book for no reason. Nobody's getting convinced by this. Finally, we get on to something of at least some interest, a section on blasphemy.
I used to question why atheists who deny Christ continue to use Christ's name, as if they intuitively acknowledge him. Saying Jesus Christ when they die in a video game or hit their knee against a table.
Sorry, Almondo, you might have forgotten the expletive is Jesus Chrsit!
It's just about undeniably evident that the person proclaiming his name is acknowledging his being, but because they reject him, they do so by cursing him. In context, they don't deny his existence and divine nature, they simply hate him and reject him.
And this is why, despite all of my frustration and at times extreme boredom going through this book, I still basically really enjoy it, in the same way that I enjoy Almondo's videos. He brings all the hits, you know? You remember when he said atheist is spelled A and then theist, and so every atheist is really a theist? It's fantastic, and this is basically on that level, and it's so beautiful it hurts. Badly. But in a good way. You freaks know what I'm talking about. As far as the argument goes, I don't think I need to explain why people using culturally pervasive expressions doesn't imply that they believe whatever thing they're referring to. That'd be a little bit insulting to you, the audience. I've done it before, but I was probably just in a mood to insult you, the audience. You probably said something I didn't like and I was mad at you. But you've been cool lately, so we're good. Let's keep it that way.
Intuitively and undeniably, they know God exists, and they know Jesus Chrsit is Lord.
You know, just as a side note, your entire life and your entire book revolve around Jesus. Of all the things that you could get right every time in this book, that should be it. Do you want to know how many times he gets this wrong? Well, I'll save it for the end of the last episode because I'm going to tally some of this stuff up. But it's a lot more than 0, which is really, really bad for a Christian.
But because of their hardened hearts, they reject that truth and rebel, causing them to curse God and hate Christ.
And then he goes on like that for a while, painting his opponents with fantasized motives with 0 evidence whatsoever. Just laughable attempts at mind reading. Anyone who doesn't already agree with him is unlikely to be convinced by this, and anyone whose internal mental states he's currently lying about is unlikely to do much other than raise an eyebrow or maybe chuckle. The fact that he claims to have all this deep knowledge about our state of mind, but then clearly has none at all, totally undermines the entire point of the book, which is to convert us. Because it shows us very clearly that he's entirely willing to bullshit despite having no idea what he's talking about. And I know this is only one topic, but that should make you a little bit suspicious that if he's willing to do it about this, he might be willing to do that about other things too. But I would assume the point of this is not to undercut his message. I don't see why he would do that intentionally. So what what is the point then? To preach to the choir? The only people who would find this at all convincing? If that's the case, I don't know what the point is. They already believe you. Why preach to them at all? Your job's done with them. You don't need to do that anymore. I guess other than as maintenance of their beliefs, which does seem to be a problem sometimes, which should be troubling to you in its own right. That doesn't need to be done when you believe things for good reasons. Anyway, now he tells us a story about a, quote, atheistic science professor who was, quote, experimenting with different solutions for the permanent removal of body hair. For some reason, this scientist decides to apply one of his solutions to his own arm, and it melts his skin and flesh and bone, which seems far-fetched at best. What the hell has he made that'll rapidly melt your entire arm, including the bone? And how would he not know he was working with something like that long before he ever applied it to himself? This seems like some real science fantasy kind of stuff. Anyway, he calls 911 and he starts screaming!
Oh God, please! I can't take this pain! God, I need help!
So it's just a repetition of the Jesus, Chrsit argument. Elements of Christianity show up in certain common expressions in English, and people who use these elements of their own language must be using it literally to express belief because there's no other way to use language. It's ridiculous on its face. It doesn't need to be addressed further. What interests me more about this story, though, is that I think this might be another Almondo original short story, similar to the one about meeting the girl in the coffee shop. At least I can't find any hint of its existence online, and it's dumb and sucks, so I don't really see a need to copy it. And plus, it's full of grammatical indicators that this is in fact his own work. For example,
picking up the solution and swirling it around as the bluish liquid lightly tornadoed the tube. He brought the solution to a tilt and his arm to a rise. Slowly pouring on the desired area, he began to gently smother around the compound in the diameter of his forearm.
If he was smearing it on the diameter of his forearm, I guess that explains why it was able to reach the bone. But tell me that doesn't sound original. So hey, Almondo, I've got my problems with this story, but at least you probably wrote it yourself, and I appreciate that. I'll take what I can get.
We have all been there before.
Have we? This doesn't exactly fall into the realm of typical human experience. This isn't a situation I really identify with. Oh yeah, the whole destroying your arm with chemicals thing. Yeah, been there.
Maybe not working on a chemical experiment, but we had all been in a place where we were in desperate need of help, and subconsciously we began to call out to God, using phrases like, oh my God, or God, please, even oh my Lord.
So you don't mean that we've all wound up melting our arms off or anything like it. You just mean we've all said, oh my God, or something like that. In which case, why did you need the story? It doesn't really help to clarify anything. You could have just said people sometimes say, oh my God. I guess the story doesn't hurt either, being there. It's just kind of useless. It doesn't seem to help convey anything you're trying to convey. And it's so extreme and so dark that it draws so much focus to itself. I feel like it kind of overshadows your point. But that's a style nitpick, it's fine.
Here is a challenge for you atheists. If you truly believe that God absolutely does not exist, or that Jesus Christ is not a divine important being, then I would challenge you to remove every bit of acknowledgement of God from your life forever.
It's a mystery to me why Almondo keeps putting out these challenges. He did that for God Is, and nobody cared. He did it for this book, complaining that if you completely destroy every single argument in the book, you might get a $50 gift card that doesn't exist. And again, nobody cared, except when they were laughing about it. And now he's doing it for this, and again, nobody cares. I have a hard time believing that there's a single person on this entire planet who cares in any way what Almondo thinks about their lexical choices. Not after seeing what's in his books, anyway. This person is not qualified to be criticizing other people's way of speaking. I have occasionally, although very, very rarely, had atheists tell me that I should reconsider my use of originally religious terms like these. Sometimes I'll say, Jesus Christ, or oh my God. And there are just a few people out there who object to that a bit. But to be honest, I don't see much point in changing. These expletives are semantically vacuous. Anyone with half a brain, anyone whose opinion matters in any way to me, understands perfectly well that an utterance of, oh my God, or Jesus Christ, is not an expression of belief, conscious or otherwise, or any kind of sincere invocation of these beings. The only people who are confused on this point are the very low-hanging fruit types like Almondo. And the fact is, if they're not confused about this, they're just going to be confused about something else, because they're confused about everything. So what does it matter?
That consists of never using his name in vain, like saying, "Oh my God," or "Jesus, curse it!"
I assure you, buddy, I've never said, "Jesus, curse it!" in my life. Well, not before this review, anyway. You keep spelling it that way, so I've had to say it that way. And it does work oddly well. Maybe it should be a thing now.
Be a consistent atheist. I personally find it impossible for anyone in the world to fully accomplish, but there is my challenge for you.
I wonder if he thinks people from cultures without a Chrysitian history also say "Jesus curse it" when they stub their toe. The assertion is that this is no mere linguistic relic, and God and Jesus are buried somewhere in the back of everyone's mind, and their names come out as expletives because everyone believes in them, which means everyone should be doing it, really, in every culture around the globe, and at about the same frequency. And yet, if you talk to non-Christian people from places with a non-Christian history, they typically don't do that. Strange. I wonder why that is. Now he rambles his way through another little sermon about how Jesus was perfect and we deserve punishment and Jesus sacrificed himself for our sins and you should accept him. It ends with "repent and believe!" And as usual in these parts, there's no argument at all. Although it's ostensibly directed at atheists, in reality it's just more preaching to the choir. The only part remotely worth responding to is this.
Why would anyone want to deny such a gift?
Well, I'll tell you. When you say deny, I don't think you mean deny as in deny the existence of. I think what you mean is reject, as in the gift was offered and you said, "I don't want that." I think that's a reasonable interpretation. If you do mean deny as in deny the existence of, then it's easy. You would want to deny the existence of such a gift if there's no good evidence of such a gift, and you care what's true. Maybe you wouldn't outright deny its existence, maybe you would just deny that its existence is likely enough to believe. Either way, hair-splitting. The point is, if you don't think it's true, you don't think it's true. Simple as that. But I think you mean reject, so we'll talk about that. If someone holds out their empty hands and says, "Here, take this gift, it's from the neighbors," I can't reject that gift or accept that gift, because there doesn't seem to be a gift to accept or reject. There's no object upon which I can act. I'm also not going to go to the neighbors after this event and thank them profusely for their beautiful gift that doesn't seem to exist. If you want me to decide to accept or reject the gift, you gotta give me some reason to think there's a real decision to be made first. I know you're sort of half-heartedly trying with some of this book, but so far it hasn't worked, and so the answer is the same as it was. I'm not rejecting a gift because I want to reject a gift. I'm not doing anything with the gift because I don't think there is a gift. Talking about what I want or don't want to do with the gift is extremely premature. Following this sermon, which takes up well over a page, he decides to present some historical accounts of Jesus, and this seems like a very odd place for them. If you were writing a chapter on the evidence for Jesus, with the hope that it would convince people that the stories are true, and then lead them ultimately to belief and repentance, how would you structure that chapter? Most likely, if you're thinking about what you're doing at all, you'd put the evidence part up front to first try to convince them that these stories are true, and then if you really wanted to include a sermon somewhere, you'd put that right at the end of the chapter. Maybe those words Armando used, repent and believe, could be the final words of the chapter, really punchy, you know? Hopefully sealing the deal once all the evidence has been delivered and the emotional appeals have been made. First, convince people that this is a serious, realistic problem and situation, and that your solution is also serious and realistic, and then conclude with a passionate speech trying to seal the deal on selling them that solution, right? But that's not the structure here. Here, there's a bit of discussion of supposed prophecies, which, okay, is an attempt to convince, to an extent. And then there's some berating of people for using common English phrases like, "oh my God," and telling them that means they already believe you, which is not likely at all to land well. Then comes the passionate selling of the solution, but then after that, there are further attempts to demonstrate that this thing is real in the first place. This should have been earlier in the chapter, is what I'm saying. The whole thing just feels confused and unfocused, and so it's somehow significantly less compelling than it already would have been if this chapter had been structured with any thought at all. So this new round of evidence for Jesus starts with a reference.
Thanks to J. Warner Wallace, these resources are available at coldcasechristianity.com/isthereevidenceforjesus.
Which, as usual, is a nonsense URL that Armando just made up off the top of his head. The correct one is totally different. Again, the topic referred to in the URL is the same, but a URL doesn't work just because it refers to the same topic. It's a computer, Almondo, not a person. It doesn't know what you want. This is followed by 2 pages of obviously copied material, but Almondo doesn't present it as a quotation, and he switches words around, and he changes others, and he adds superfluous snippets like "a man by the name of" to make it look more like his own work, which of course fails completely. I still don't understand what he thinks he's doing. Sometimes he seems to have almost got the message that he should be citing his sources, but then when he does that, most of the time he does it in a way where he's still plagiarizing from them. It would be so easy just to quote them properly or to write original work based on their information, but he just cannot bring himself to do that for reasons I can't begin to understand.
Everything is unique, everything is new, and everything is original. The material in this book are going to be arguments that you have never heard and that are irrefutable. Why? Because even for the time being, these are fresh new arguments for the existence of God and the reliability of the New Testament. These are fresh new arguments that have never been heard from any apologist, and arguments that have never been heard before.
There's no point in me addressing any of these claims because I'm here to respond to Almondo, not J. Warner Wallace. After some more insistence that based on all of this, Jesus is very, very historically verified and definitely God and such, the chapter mercifully ends. Just what did he expect to accomplish with this? He had to have known that the way he presented everything in this chapter would have gone down badly with basically everyone. Or maybe, once again, I'm giving him way too much credit. That is a thing I do sometimes. Well, there's only one more chapter left. Hopefully you'll join me for that one. Thanks for watching this one, and before you go, if you would be so kind, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And if you like the channel, also please consider supporting. A small amount per video or per month is hugely helpful, and enormous thanks to all of my supporters who've already made that choice. For early access, sign up to the email list, list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.